I want to welcome you to the next stage of my journey on hiking the Camino. An amazing opportunity from the Lord. Again, it's an opportunity. It wasn't a must. It wasn't an imperative in my life. It was an open door that the Lord was saying, if you trust me, I'll open the opportunity. I'll open this pathway for you to be able to enter into. It's not necessarily going to be easy to access the opportunity. It's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some determination. It's going to take some willingness to maybe do things that are not comfortable for you. And that meant things like leaving my home for 35 to 40 days. It meant trusting that the Lord would provide financially, take care of the details of our lives, that Carrie, my wife, would have the support she needed, and that the blessings and benefits that were identified as being capable of being achieved, the goals that could be accomplished would in fact happen. And since there was no guarantee, since I'd never done anything like this before in my life, and so here I am now on day 28 of the journey, and I'm approaching. I'm going from Triacastela to Sarria, and I want to share with you a bit about this particular day in that journey. I'm going to be arriving at Sarria, and I'll mention this tomorrow, that Sarria is the sort of secondary starting place for those who are walking this French way of the Camino. The sort of the most popular travel route is to start about 113 kilometers or 70 something miles away from Santiago de Compostela. That's the shortest amount of distance that you can walk the Camino and receive the Compostela, receive that certificate of completion. So today I'm launching from Triacastela. And I had mentioned in my last video that when I got to Triacastela, I had picked this particular place to stay at, that I had two options. And again, this particular hostel was something that it had prompted up inside of me. It was like, I don't know why, but I sense that I'm supposed to go to this hostel rather than that one. And sure enough, it ended up being for me a great gift. The things that opened up to me as a result of that, I was able to have breakfast right there on site. Most importantly, I was able to have this glue to fix my sneaker, and also met a wonderful Italian couple that we committed to be praying the rosary for each other. So those spiritual goods as well were part of that day. Well, today would give me another facet of that sense of God's timing and following God's prompting. So I knew the pain of ignoring the prompting, which I just shared with you about the day before. Like, you don't know what's at stake in the moment, but discerning, is now the time? Is this the time? I think of Acts chapter 3. Peter and John are going up to the temple, as was their custom. This is again after Pentecost, and they see the man who is paralyzed there, who's asking for gold and silver. And he would have been there every day at the beautiful gate. And Peter and John are going past him every day as they're going up to the temple for the evening offering. And the interesting thing was today was a different day for them. Today was the day where Peter felt the prompting to stop and engage that man in conversation. Not other days where he likely saw him, but today was that day. Well, that's what happened to me on the Camino on this day 28. There was a woman that I ended up passing by, and it was interesting how it all happened. So I started my day in the same way, in prayer. And so as I'm praying my rosary, I'm praying for my family, first of all, right? Focusing in on the mystery with each particular family member, mysteries of the rosary. And then I'm also praying for people I've met on the way. So I had finished my rosary for my family, and now I'm praying for people I've met on the way. And this one particular woman popped into my head. as someone to pray for. And it was interesting because she's someone that I had passed by a number of times. I had first met her as someone staying in the next room in the hostel where I was staying at. And it was funny because I was recording one of my reflections on the video, and I was outside her room. I didn't realize that she was in her room. And as I'm recording, I can see into just like there was a curtain, but I could see there was some movement in the room. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm kind of not quite holding a person hostage there. But as I'm recording the video, she's like just sort of doing whatever she's doing in the room. And so when I was done afterwards, she ended up coming out and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were there. And so that was my first interaction with this woman. And again, a woman from the United States. And so I didn't end up having much of a conversation with her there. Just, said hello, introduced ourselves, but I didn't feel any prompting at that moment to have like a meaningful conversation with her. Well, the it might have been the next day or the day after that when well, in fact, no, it was that next day. The next day, it was that was the long day where I had would come from the cruise to Faro and dislocated my ankle, and I'm walking down the hill, that very, 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 very long hill, and I ended up passing by her. She was going incredibly slowly because she had hurt her shin and had shin splints, and so she was in a lot of pain, and I was like myself struggling, and so I did not have any energy to sort of say, "Oh, let me slow down my pace and spend some time chatting with her." I'm just like, I just need to keep going, and so we acknowledged each other, just said, "Come on, you got this," and I kept moving. Just so happened that like a day or two later, again, walking on the path and ended up passing by a little bar where some of the fellow pilgrims were sitting having a cup of coffee, and there she was again. And so we just acknowledged each other, said hello, kept going. And there was another time when I was again in town, and she was sitting with some other pilgrims eating a meal. And once again, waved hello and kept moving on. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, Lord, I keep seeing this woman, but we haven't had any significant conversation, but she's very friendly and remembers my name and is, saying hello. But neither of us like made any specific sense of, oh, let's make sure that we connect and have a conversation. So I was praying for her, and I was like, I wonder how she's doing, and I'm wondering, like, what's that all about? Why haven't I had a chance to or am I supposed to, and why haven't I had a meaningful conversation with her? As that's happening, I look ahead of me on the path, and I see a woman that has her color hair, and I'm thinking, oh, you're kidding me. Yeah, and it was her. So I ended up catching up to her, and she was going a little bit slower than I would have been walking. But this was a shorter walk this particular day. And I thought, you know what? If there's a conversation to be had here, I'm open to having it. So I said hello. She again, Tom, hey, great to see you again. And I just said in passing, I said, hey, how many times have we now like crossed paths but not had a conversation? I said, I think this is our time. And she said, absolutely, let's talk. And we ended up having a very meaningful and a really beautiful and powerful conversation that ended up going deep pretty quickly. And so again, when you have conversations like this on the Camino, people tend to have a greater sense of openness because they're there. There's some inflection point in their lives, and so they're there to explore and discover and reflect. And so when opportunities come up, they tend to have a greater sense of willingness to dive in. And so this was a woman that was like that. While she could have the sort of typical standard like social level of surface conversation, she was willing to also go deeper. And it was a real blessed conversation from that standpoint. We started off with those normal questions, And so she was a person who had started the Camino with her husband, who was there just to kind of get her launched. And then he left, and then she was walking the rest of it alone. It was something that she had wanted to do. She had heard about it from some friends, and now it was her time to do it. And she was again at this inflection point where they had sold a business and was now interested in trying to figure out what's next in my life. What's next in this stage of my life? She's in her 50s, and so she and her husband have a bit of a bit of wealth or capacity to be able to say, let's just take a year off. Let's just sort of rest, recover from all of those years of business building and business selling. And let's now just sort of peacefully kind of get level set for what's next in our lives. And so along the way, I then bring up the question, well, is there anything, like, as you look at this next stage in your life, I said, is there any way that you incorporate a sense of spirituality, a sense of God in this journey? And very interesting. That came about in part because of, again, her asking me, why are you on the Camino? And I tell the story of this 10x life and the story of being a pilgrim. And she was just, again, fascinated with this idea. And it makes sense, right? Because she's trying to figure out what's next in her life, right? What's the vision that she has for her next stage in life? And so this whole approach of saying, well, what is a more ideal picture of my life and the realization of that ideal look like in terms of how I'm going to live day to day? So there was that, and so we explored into that, and I said, how does that strike you? What does that mean for you in your life? And for me, the picture involved God, right? So God was the one who had this picture of my ideal life that he had for me to live and what I'm striving to achieve. And so that opened up her sense of how was God part of her life. And she ended up with a very kind of an interesting starting point, and that was that she would see signs. There were indications that she was receiving that gave her a sense that there was someone watching over her. And the sign was for her feathers. And so she had a number of stories on her Camino where was a feather that was kind of placed in front of her, like just popped up and appeared in front of her at these poignant moments. And she wasn't exactly sure that it hasn't like broken open the full meaning of it, just that there was some kind of uh, confirmation occurring through this sign. And so I started to explore that with her from the standpoint of, well, what does it mean? And it seemed to mean that there were the timing of these things where it was a sign of you are being watched over, you're being taken care of. So then I asked the very natural question, who's doing the watching over? Who's taking care of you? And that then led into her sharing about the place of God in her life. And fascinating story, grew up without any real formation in any religious practice, in part because of her mom's untimely passing when she was just 5 years old. And so being brought up in a home with a single dad, the dad would be very hard. He was a very hard worker, and so she would end up being watched by sort of a babysitter or cared for by a neighbor over the course of her day before she was school age. And that woman, unfortunately, was someone who was very a bit rigid and harsh in how she implemented discipline, and did so on the basis of a Christian faith, that she practiced a faith that was a bit, again, the way that it manifested herself in terms of how she communicated to this woman was that this was kind of a harsh, hard, not very compassionate and loving and understanding. And so that had an impact on her. It really, that plus her husband, her dad's non-practice of faith, had her grow up through her high school years and then beyond that without any really formal training in any faith at all. Even though it was in America, you'd imagine, gosh, she would have lots of experience with some form of Christianity. And the answer was no, she really didn't. So that's how she had been living through the course of her life. And now here she is in her 50s. And so the idea of God was something that she accepted. She said that she did believe in God. And I said, can we explore that? She said, absolutely. So let's talk about that. And so I was like, well, the most natural question that I'd love to ask people who have a sense of God, but haven't really pondered it deeply or tried to explore how what's at stake in that belief in God, was I said, do you believe that God is personal? And she said, well, yes, I believe God is personal. So not just a vague life force or a spiritual energy or some source of all creation that is impersonal. No, that this God is personal. And then I said, well, does this personal God know you? Is there a concept of a relationship with this personal God who personally created the world and you as this distinct individual? And she said, I never really explored that idea. Never really thought about that before. And I said, well, let's imagine if this God is personal, and I want to propose to you that God is personal, not only personal, but knows you personally and wants to communicate with you. And said, is that something that you would be open to? And she said, well, yeah, but I have no idea how to do it. And I just thought of the scriptures, right? Lord, teach us how to pray, right? How am I supposed to access communication with God if I've never been taught how to pray? I said, well, are you open to having me share some thoughts? She said, well, absolutely. So here we are connecting. The entry point was that she has had a sense of something watching over and caring for her through the symbol of these feathers. And then from there saying, this Camino has been an amazing experience of being able to strip down and focus and reflect. And now there's this sense of timing to open up this conversation around saying, you know what? I would love to learn how to pray. So let's get into that. So I ended up having 3 different recommendations for her regarding how to pray, 3 different specific prayers. And I share these with you because these would be things that might in fact be helpful to you in your own life of prayer as well as in terms of sharing with people who maybe have a more vague sense of God, but haven't really explored, is God personal? Is God wanting a relationship with me? And how do I open myself to enter into a more personal relationship with the personal God? So the first thing I recommended to her, I said, well, you find a space and a time that can be set apart for you to have this communication with God. So I said, maybe not while you're also walking, because that can distract you. It can be harder to do that as a first natural place. I said, maybe it can be outside. You find a place where you can sit and whether it's morning or night, whether it's in front of the night sky or a beautiful vista or a garden or flowers or trees or whatever. Or I said maybe it's in a church. Maybe it's in a church because that will be like a holy environment. That's what it's created for. So you choose a space that's going to be less distracting, where you can focus on this communication. And then I said, trust that this God wants to communicate with you more than you want to communicate with God. Trust that this God is more personal than you are, and that this God is waiting and knocking at the door of your life in order to be able to foster a deeper union and a richer connection and a more profound communication in your life. And so it was simple. It was, again, you don't have to make things complicated. So the simple way that I encouraged her to pray was, I said, you can go and you can simply say God, or you choose the word that is going to be like most comfortable for you. And she was comfortable with God. I said, God, would you please reveal your love for me? Would you please reveal to me your personal love for me, and reveal it in a way that I would know that it's you loving me? Reveal yourself to me as the personal God who knows me, is caring for me, watching over me, and desires to love me and nurture a relationship with me. Now, I said a lot of words there, and maybe that was maybe less simple than I just proposed, but she took it in, she understood it, and it was like, I can do that. That's something that I can do. I can take in that prayer, and it's something that I can do in a space that will be for me a space that is set apart for this communication. So that was the first prayer. So you can, if you can hear it, and maybe that's something that you might want to take into your own life of prayer as well, is, Lord, I want to grow in my sense of just how personal you are and the personal love you have for me, knowing my situation and taking care of me in this moment. I'm open to that. Please reveal, break open that love that you have for me. Okay. The second had to do with, um, is there something about the loss of your mother that could potentially be holding you back in your relationship with God? And I brought that up as a second point of prayer because of something that she had said in passing in our conversation, which was, you know what, it was hard to want to even seek a relationship with God, that same God who took away the mother of a 5-year-old, right? And so there was a way in which there is maybe deep in her memory, in her heart, a wound, a disappointment, an anger or a bitterness or an anguish over not just I lost my mother, but you, God, took my mother from me. And so one of the things that she had said was, when I'd said to her, do you believe that there is life after death? And she said, yes. And I said, well, for your mom too, then. So I said, if we believe or if we accept this idea that your mom is in the hands of God, I said, one of the things that I believe as a Catholic is that your mom in the hands of God sees you, knows what's happening in your life, and is loving you as well. And so I said, one of the second like lanes of prayer, one of the second sort of prayer times that you could take would be for you to ask God, this loving personal God who sees you and knows you and wants to love you in new ways, would be to ask God, Lord or God, would you please help me to have a sense, help me to see, or help me to have an inkling or an insight that my mom is with you and sees me, knows me, and is loving me right now. I would dearly appreciate and would deeply, I would find deeply meaningful a sense of being connected to my mom. Even now, 50 years later, would you do that, Lord? I said, I'm believing that there may be a place in your heart, a place in your memory that has set up a wall, a blockage that is holding back an openness to trust and to receive God more fully in your life. Because if I open and trust this God and receive this Lord to come closer into my life, well, what might happen? Because this is the God who took away my mom as a 5-year-old. And again, this can, whatever the thinking is at that age, that can take root and take hold. And so I shared that again with you. I shared that with her, and she says, you know, I'm open to doing that, and that was a bit emotional for her, but it was something that she was also open to do it. And again, never really thought of that at all as something that would be a path forward for her life of faith, but that was something that she would also explore. And I share that with you because there may be blockages from your life in your past that were there from some early memory, some early happening that was particularly like disruptive and painful, like the loss of a mom or a dad or some other family circumstance that was disruptive of peace and something that would be typical or ordinary in terms of the growth of our lives. And the Lord wants to heal those things. He wants to remove those blockages. He wants to lift those things. And so please, I encourage you to take that on as a way of praying for yourself as well. The third had to do with the friends that she had been hanging around with, that in her own like circle of friends and neighbors and things like that, there were several people who were practicing Christians and were, in fact, even very involved in churches. And one of them, in fact, was like a pastor who would found churches. So she had many friends who were Christian and very overt and active about their Christian faith. And one of the things I found interesting was that none of them had ever had this kind of conversation with her. And who knows, maybe they have been praying for her to be able to have this kind of conversation, to meet somebody who could, in fact, break open the question of Jesus for her life and in her life. And I was the answer to her prayer, to their prayer for her. So I said to her, I said, well, as you're growing in this relationship or this openness to grow in a relationship with God, I said, is there any sense of openness to consider Jesus and to invite Jesus Christ to be someone who comes close to you? And she said yes. She said that that would be something that she'd be open to as well. And so I said, okay, so for this particular time of prayer, I'm going to encourage you to go into a church, these Catholic churches that are there, because you'll see many images of Christ, whether it's statues or the crucifix or the tabernacle, the presence of Christ. And I said to her, I said, there'll be a sense of Christ's presence in a church for a variety of reasons. The many pilgrims that have prayed there, the millions of pilgrims that will have prayed in these churches through the year, leave this sort of density or of this atmosphere of faith and prayer that was expressed there. I said, that's something that you can lean into and something that you can be blessed by. But I said, go into a church, come into, again, a place of solitude and silence, and then you can specifically address Jesus. Jesus, if you're real, show yourself to me. Jesus, if you're really there, reveal yourself to me. Did you hear those prayers? Very simple, and it's something that you can do. Jesus, if you're really there and you know me, you see me, you love me, if you're really there, show yourself to me. And again, do it in a way that I will know that it's you. If you're really there, reveal yourself to me and do it in a way that I'll know it's you. I'm not just thinking, oh, this is me, it's my own thinking. No, it's you. And so she was again saying, yes, I am open to doing that. That's something that I would love to do and I'm going to do. And so that was the conversation we had. And it unfolded. And there were many other things we ended up talking about as we walked our own way. And then we ended up reaching that natural like endpoint. She says, you know what I'm going to do? She just stopped. And she said, I feel like I'm supposed to wait for this particular couple that I had seen and talked to on the path a number of times. And I'm getting a little tired because I was walking a little faster than her. And so what ended up happening was we ended up stopping. She says, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to sit in this chair. I'm going to wait for them. And I said, great, I'm going to go my own way. And at that moment, she looked down and she just tapped me on the shoulder. She said, look there. And literally at our feet where we had stopped to part ways was a feather. So for her, it was just another one of those wonderful confirmations that, in fact, uh, she was being watched over, she was being cared for. And so for her, it was a beautiful way of receiving the answer to that prayer. Communicate to me in a way that I know that this is you, Lord, and not just me thinking. So that feather ended up coming into play at that final moment. So there you go. There's my story for today. I hope and pray that that was a blessing to you, and continue to follow me on my journey of hiking the Camino.